September the 6th, 2017. You're looking at quite an unusual tropical weather outlook map. You've got Irma in the center, still at 185 millibars. Now the pressure's dropped to 918 millibars. That's important. It's also sped up slightly to 16 miles an hour forward progress, and that's moving west-northwest. Now the system we watched in the Gulf for the last few days is now Katia. 40 mile per hour sustained winds. It is still moving east-southeast at 2 knots or 2 miles an hour. That's out into the Gulf. West would be into Mexico. North would be into Texas. It's moving the opposite direction. The longer it stays out over the water like this, the stronger it can become. Now, it is predicted to be forced out of the Gulf once Irma gets there. Jose is up to 60 miles an hour. Tropical storm. It is moving west at 13 miles an hour. Central pressure of 1,002 millibars. Now, this is the morning radar. This is wide Atlantic view. You can see it sweeping from infrared to visible as the sun comes up over the United States and over the Atlantic. Very powerful eye wall on Irma. Check that out as it starts going over the islands. So far, it's just on the top of the windwards. It is not yet in the area to where the tall mountains could affect a storm this size, but it's about to get there. We're going to have to watch out for all of these areas: Puerto Rico, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba. Don't forget that, the Bahamas, and then into the Keys of South Florida. Tremendous amount of moisture being pumped up out of the Gulf of Mexico by Catlin. Looking at the infrared images, as the sun has come back over, now it is also over the Gulf of Mexico, you can see that those cloud tops are getting stronger again. You're about to see some rotation, it looks like, on both sides of the storms. You see those two halves. And this moisture, again, is going to be pumped straight to the Gulf of Mexico across this area, anywhere from South Mississippi into the lower parts of the Florida Panhandle, all the way out into the Atlantic. You see this? Moisture is being pumped, so you're getting a pre-stage flood set up. Now, the models are starting to change drastically. They're moving back east, not showing a direct impact on Florida at this point, except for the LGEM model, still showing it going into the Gulf of Mexico. Everything else shows it curving around the Bahamas and moving in between that strait right up the Gulf extreme, guys. In that Gulf stream, you got extremely warm water, so this scenario really puts the east coast of Florida under the gun. You're still going to get hammered at the Keys if this holds up. They change every day. But look at Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. You could take the brunt of a Cat 5, possibly a Cat 4 hurricane as it comes across the islands. Nothing to play with. It is a blessing for those in the Gulf because we're trying to recover from Harvey. It's not a blessing for you guys on the East Coast for a storm this strong to be headed in your direction. Now, we've seen the models change each day. We're going to watch them each day until we know exactly where the storm's going to hit. Now, I want to look at the official track from the National Hurricane Center. Notice your top left, and it's showing still a direct hit on the tip of South Florida. It's going to come in as a 4. It will, as it moves inland, and you can see it just south as far as the eye of Lake Okeechobee, right in the central part of Florida. 2 a.m. Monday, winds 120 miles an hour inland, but 2 a.m. Sunday, 145 miles an hour winds right on the tip. And guys, if you look at this, this is going to be the critical point as far as impact. This will be your last chance at really getting out and warning. That's getting out and getting out of the way. That's 2 a.m. Saturday in the morning. That tells you Friday is your last day to get prepared, be ready to go, have some bags packed, some extra water, some food, things like that. Have your plans if you're not already out. And if you think about it, in the Keys, you've got mandatory evacuation. But Florida has a couple of highways that move north and south that are major highways. They're going to be pretty jammed. And if you want to get caught up in that, trying to find gas and water and food and things like that, or a room or shelter, that's not the scenario you want. You don't want to be stuck on the highway. Now, if you're in North Florida, that may be a better option than being in the Keys in your home, or in South Florida in Miami. This is going to do some damage. Now, Jose still has got that turn into the North Atlantic, and notice that it's by 2 a.m. Friday, you got a Cat 2 on your hands. You got it goes into a Category 1 by tomorrow, stays a Cat 2 until it gets into cooler waters right here as it moves north of the islands. Now, this is currently at 60 miles an hour. It's moving west at 13 miles an hour. Central pressure, 1,002 millibars. Now, looking at Catia a minute, it's still projected to strengthen. Now it's at 45 miles an hour. Could go up to 60 to 70 miles an hour here by Friday. But what's I think is happening here, this model has not changed. It was predicted that as Irma came into South Florida, possibly into the Gulf, that system would push this back over the peninsula. Now, will that hold true with Irma pulling back up possibly along the East Coast instead of coming into the Gulf? What will that do to Tropical Storm Catia? If by Friday you got winds at 70 miles per hour, that's just 4 miles under a Cat 1 hurricane. We're going to have to watch this one. Now, if we look at the global forecast model, let me play this forward, guys. This is showing it's so close to the edge of Florida on the east side that it's almost worse than a direct hit. Why? Because the eye is staying in warm water the entire time instead of coming ashore and starting to fade out. Second storm comes right, loops around, comes right back up the east coast. Notice the system in the Gulf. They're predicting Irma to push it back into the Yucatan. Did you see that? Now you've got 2 storms off the east coast. So the further that the Irma and Jose track back east, the less pressure it will be on Jose in the Gulf to be forced out. Because right now it's still moving southeast. Right here, that's September 9th. The outer bands are very close to reaching Florida. This is just a model. The storm is a little bigger than this. We move this thing forward. Still on the 9th. You're getting impact in the southern tip of Florida at this point. You get into the 9th still. You can see the movement. The 10th is there. September the 10th. The eye is right off the tip of Florida. The Keys are getting shredded at this point. Even if it's a Cat 4, that's still very, very destructive. You can look at the video from yesterday as they describe it. A Cat 4, Cat 5 has some of the same destructive characteristics. More buildings will survive as far as total collapse in a 4 than they will a 5. But your roofs are gone. Exterior walls could collapse. Trees are gone. Power's gone. The area could be uninhabitable for months. That's how they describe this thing. Step it forward through the 10th. You're skating up the east coast. The eye staying in the water, pounding Florida. Bahamas are catching it at this point. Come up to the 11th. You're just off central of Florida's coast at this point. Still the eye's in the water. That could be the worst case scenario instead of that eye coming straight up the peninsula and starting to weaken. This thing doesn't, if it stays right here, it could be even more dangerous than we thought. Let's step it up, going through the 11th. And so from the time you go from the 9th, as the outer bands are reaching Florida, the entire day of the 9th and the 10th, the East Coast is getting pounded. Just now, this model is showing on September 11th that it's starting to move ashore. We'll just kind of play this thing forward. Moving up and back out to sea. While Jose waits here, another storm is here. Now, as we've seen these models change so much, we see Irma go up the East Coast again, pushing the system out of the Gulf. Will Jose turn back around, and as the models change, that become the predominant hurricane next week? We don't know. We're going to be watching that too. Now, currently the Navy's NAVGEM model is almost exactly on the track of the National Hurricane Center. Check this out, guys. Skates up the East Coast, plows into the border of Georgia, South Carolina, followed by Jose behind it. Now, this doesn't extend out as far. But either way, Florida, you're not out of the gun. This possibly could be a worst case scenario for the East Coast. As that storm pulls forward, though, think about it. It's rotating counterclockwise. The winds are going to be pushed into the east coast of Florida. But on the other side in the Gulf, guys, you're going to be getting the opposite effect as the storm pulls north. The winds are going to start pulling from the Gulf inland on a storm this size. So, again, we're going to have to watch every aspect of this thing as it moves in. Now, there's some interesting things on the Canadian model. This is mean sea level pressure and the streamlines. You're seeing Irma go up the east coast. 2 more storms have formed behind it. You see Jose, another one coming off at that point. But watch this. Irma, supposedly pushing the system out of the Gulf of Mexico. Jose right behind it. Another storm has formed coming off of Africa. And now a third storm off of Africa. So what you're looking at now, the remnants of Jose and the 2 other storms. We are under the gun. It's like a hurricane cannon being fired off the coast of Africa right now. Extremely hot weather, extremely hot water because of the extreme gamma radiation that we're seeing. I know it's summer, I know it's hurricane season, but this is different. We're seeing extreme hurricane releases, and when a hurricane comes across the Gulf or the Atlantic, it's releasing a tremendous amount of built-up heat on this planet. Pulls it up into the higher atmosphere, cools it off, you get your big storms, and it's a heat release for this planet so that it does not overheat. So when you see this type of activity, you're seeing global heat dissipation, not because of man-made global warming, but because of our shields are low, we're in a solar minimum, and we're getting it pounded by this gamma radiation up 18-19% across the nation in the last year and a half. Think about it. You go outside now, it doesn't take long, and you're sunburned. Bad sunburn. So, luckily we're getting into the fall. That could change some, but the water's extremely hot. The Gulf is extremely hot. Florida's still warm. Remember the Lucifer heat wave that came across Europe and heated everything? That's what we're dealing with. All of that's got to be dissipated, and we're in that pattern. Guys, we're watching this. It's a heads up. Be safe.